I'm Mason 32 male. My name is Mason Thompson, and I am the eldest son of the most prestigious family in Savannah, Georgia. I live in an old mansion with ivy-covered walls and heavy iron gates, a place where every shadow whispers of history and duty. To the world, my family is old money, a dynasty with investments stretching from cotton fields to skyscrapers. But to me, that wealth has always felt like a gilded cage. This is the story of how I left that cage, lost everything, and finally found a life that was truly my own. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. I grew up in the suffocating shadow of my father, Bernard Thompson. At 62, he is the founder of Thompson and Company, a private financial conglomerate that manages the wealth of the South's oldest families. My father is a cold man with eyes as sharp as knives and a deep, resonant voice that sounds only like a command. He wears impeccably tailored suits, and every word he speaks carries the weight of absolute authority. To him, reputation and status are the only measures of a person's worth. Choosing the right person to marry, he'd often say, is more important than choosing the right industry to invest in. It wasn't advice. It was a directive, an invisible chain he wrapped around me. I did everything he asked. I went to an Ivy League school, earned a business degree, and returned to become the director of business development at his company. It was a prestigious position that everyone envied, but for me it felt like a velvet-upholstered chair lined with thorns. Every day I'd sit in my office overlooking the Savannah River, watching the ships drift by, and feel an emptiness so profound it was almost a physical ache. I was living a life that simply didn't belong to me. Our home was a perfect picture from the outside, but inside the cracks were everywhere. My mother, Catherine, is a kind but frail woman of 58. She was once a painter, her canvases bursting with color and life. But my father forced her to set aside her passion to become the perfect corporate wife, polished, proper, and always silent. I remember as a child I'd find her painting in the attic, her eyes sparkling. That spark is long gone, replaced by a quiet, heartbreaking resignation. Seeing her was like watching a part of my own soul being imprisoned. Then there's my younger brother, Jacob. At 29, Jacob is a Category 5 hurricane of recklessness. He's lazy, entitled, and lost in a world of gambling, drinking, and fleeting relationships. I've lost count of the number of nights I've had to drag him out of a casino or clean up a mess he made at a party. He'd just smirk, his eyes bloodshot, and say, "Big brother, why are you always so serious?" I don't hate him, I pity him. But every time I had to cover his tracks, the fragile thread connecting me to my family stretched thinner. The only person in that house who truly understood me was my youngest sister, Hazel. At 26, Hazel is a psychologist at the Savannah Community Center, spending her days healing wounded souls. She is calm, insightful, and has warm brown eyes that seem to see through every facade. She was the only one I could be honest with. "Mason," she told me one evening on the porch, "you don't have to live to please Dad. You have the right to choose your own path." Her words were a lifeline, but I didn't yet have the courage to grasp it. My breaking point began on a sweltering summer afternoon. The air was thick with the scent of magnolias. My father walked into my office. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "Mason," he said, his voice low and sharp, "I have a new project for you. I want you to evaluate a farm on the outskirts of Georgia, determine if it's worth Thompson and Company's capital." He squeezed my shoulder. "Don't disappoint me. This isn't just about money, it's about our reputation." I nodded as I always did, but inside a storm was stirring. That night I packed for the trip, carrying the weight of his expectations. I had no idea that this simple assignment would change my entire world. The next morning I drove my sleek black SUV down the red dirt road, the project dossier on the passenger seat. The farm wasn't large, but it was immaculate. When I stepped out of the car, straightening my tie, I felt completely out of place. And then I saw her. Her name was Rebecca Allen. She stood in the middle of a processing area wearing a simple cotton shirt and faded jeans, holding a clipboard. Her dark curly hair was tied up and her brown skin seemed to glow in the sunlight. She was directing a group of workers, her voice clear and firm but kind. "Be careful with this batch," she said, and everyone moved with an evident respect I had never seen in my father's boardroom. I just stood there, forgetting why I had come. There was a determination in her eyes, a complete lack of artifice. She was entirely different from the cold, calculated world I came from. I approached and introduced myself. She looked up and gave me a slight, unpretentious smile. "Hi, I'm Rebecca Allen, the manager here. What would you like to see?" Her voice was warm, but held none of the flattery I was used to. She took me on a tour, explaining crop rotation and labor organization with an enthusiasm that was infectious. I was supposed to be looking at numbers, but I was captivated by the way she laughed, the way she spoke of her work with such pride. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. In the days that followed, I found every excuse to return to that farm. I'd claim I needed to check data or meet the owner, but the truth was I just wanted to see Rebecca. We started talking, really talking. She told me about her childhood in Alabama, and I told her about Savannah, carefully avoiding the details of my family. Our relationship grew quietly, like a blade of grass pushing through stone. I began to look forward to sitting on an old wooden bench with her, sipping coffee as the sun went down. She didn't care about my last name, my money, or my status. She saw me, Mason, not the Thompson heir, and I was falling completely in love with her. That happiness, that first real breath of fresh air in my life, couldn't last long. The gilded cage has bars, and its keeper is always watching. One evening, after spending the day with Rebecca, I returned to the mansion. My father was waiting for me in his study. The desk lamp cast a harsh light on his face, highlighting his cold, sharp features. "Mason," he said, his voice so low it made me shiver, "sit down." I knew this was it. I sat in the leather chair opposite him, my hands clenching in my lap. "I had you followed," he stated, not as an apology but as a fact. "Do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I wouldn't find out about this? Girl," he spat the word out as if it tasted like poison. "Rebecca Allen, a hired worker, a black woman from a middle-class background. Do you have any idea what you are doing?" My heart stopped. His investigator had uncovered everything. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling but resolute, "I love her. Times have changed. Love isn't bound by race or status." He laughed. It was a dry, hollow, emotionless sound that chilled me to the bone. "Times?" he scoffed. "You think times change your duty to this family? I have poured my entire life into you, Mason. You are the heir. You are the future of Thompson and Company, and you dare to betray me, to betray our name for a girl who is utterly unworthy of it." "She is not unworthy," the words tore out of me, louder than I intended. "She's the most genuine person I've ever met, more genuine than anyone in this house." "Genuine? We are not a family of farmhands, Mason. We are Thompsons. You will end this pathetic little affair immediately. You will return to your duties and you will marry the woman I have chosen for you. That is final." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and the lifetime of fear I'd held for him just evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard anger. No. The silence in the room was absolute. He had never heard that word from me before. "What did you say?" he whispered, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I said no," I repeated, standing up. "I'm not your tool, Dad. I'm not a pawn in your game of reputation. I have spent my entire 32 years trying to be the son you wanted, trying to please you, trying to uphold this reputation you worship. But I'm tired, I'm done. I want to live my own life." My father's face turned a deep, dark red. He stood, slamming his hands on the desk. "You dare?" he hissed. "You ungrateful child, I gave you everything. This house, your education, your job, your very name. You gave me a cage," I shot back. "I'm choosing freedom." He stared at me, his chest heaving. The rage in his eyes was quickly replaced by something colder, something final. "Fine," he said, his voice dropping back to that icy whisper. "If you choose that path, if you choose her, you are no longer my son. Walk out that door and you will have nothing. You will be cut off. You will be nothing. Do you understand me?" I stood there, my breathing heavy, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was the moment. The choice was a gilded prison or a terrifying, unknown freedom with the only person I'd ever truly loved. In that instant, everything inside me that had been screaming for years finally found its voice. I looked my father in the eye. "I understand perfectly," I said. I said nothing more. I turned my back on him and walked out of that suffocating room. As I crossed the grand foyer, I saw my mother standing on the staircase, her trembling hands gripping the railing. "Mason," she called out softly, her voice choked with tears. I looked up, desperate for her. To say something, to stand up for me just once. But she only lowered her head, her sobs muffled in her hands. She was a prisoner, and she refused to even try the lock. Jacob was at the dining table, casually cutting into a steak, a mocking smirk on his lips. "Good luck, big brother," he said, not even looking up. And Hazel, my little sister Hazel, sat in a chair in the corner, her head bowed, her eyes filled with a pained, helpless empathy. She wanted to say something, I know she did, but she was trapped too. I reached the front door. From behind me my father's voice rang out, cold and final. "You'll come crawling back, you'll end up as nothing, and you'll beg for my forgiveness." I didn't respond. I just pushed open the heavy wooden door and the cool night air hit my face. As the massive iron gate clanged shut behind me, the sound echoed in the Savannah night. It was the full stop on a life I'd never wanted. I got in my car, the last thing I had from his world, and drove away, not knowing where I was going, only knowing I could never go back. I drove through the familiar streets, the glow of the streetlights flashing across my windshield. My father's voice, "You'll be nothing," echoed in my head. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid. I felt light. The boulder that had been crushing my chest for 32 years was gone. I called Rebecca, her voice warm as summer sunlight cut through the cold of the night. "Mason, what's wrong?" "I'm at the farm," she said when I told her I was just driving. "Come here." I drove straight there without a second's hesitation. When I arrived, she was standing on the porch, wrapped in an old sweater, her eyes full of concern under the dim light. She didn't ask any questions. She just saw the look on my face, opened her arms, and wrapped me in an embrace that was so warm and steady, I felt my entire body finally relax. I told her everything. The argument, the ultimatum, how I'd walked away from my family, my inheritance, my entire life. She listened without judgment, her hand holding mine, nodding gently. When I finished, I looked at her, suddenly terrified. "I have nothing, Rebecca." He cut me off completely. "I'm not the man you met." She smiled, a small, soft smile, and touched my cheek. "Good," she said. "I never much cared for that man. I care about you, Mason, and you're right here." For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. Not because of my name or my bank account, but because of love. A week later, we moved into a small apartment in Midtown on the western outskirts of Savannah. It was an old building, with walls that needed a coat of paint and floors that creaked, but to me, it was warmer and more beautiful than any room in the Thompson mansion. I had to start from scratch. I used my experience from Thompson and Company to apply for a job at a small investment firm, one that specialized in consulting for local family businesses, a world away from my father's corporate rating. Thanks to my background, I was hired as a financial analyst. The job wasn't glamorous. The pay was a fraction of what I was used to, but it was mine. I felt free. Every evening, I'd come home to that little apartment, and Rebecca would be there, her smile filling the tiny kitchen. Her laughter was like a melody that washed away all the fatigue of the day. 3 months later, we got married. We didn't have a grand affair at the Savannah Cathedral. We had a simple ceremony under the ancient oaks at the farm where we met. Rebecca's family and friends came, bringing homemade dishes and lively stories. She wore a simple white dress, her curly hair cascading down her back, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I stood there holding her hands, my heart so full I thought it might burst. But that joy was tinged with sorrow. From my side, only one person came, Hazel. She had defied my father's orders to sneak out and be there for me. "You deserve to be happy, Mason," she whispered as she hugged me, and I had to fight back tears. My mother didn't come, my father didn't come, and Jacob, of course, didn't either. But when I looked at Rebecca, I knew with an unshakable certainty that I had made the right choice. Our new life was simple, but it was real. And then, one morning, we made a discovery that changed everything once again. Rebecca came out of the bathroom, her hands trembling. She was holding a pregnancy test, and her eyes were shimmering with tears of joy. "Mason," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "we're going to have a baby." I hugged her, lifting her off the ground, feeling as if the entire universe had just clicked into place. All the pain, all the loss, it all led to this. To this moment with this woman and the new life we had created. As the weeks went on, Rebecca's hope began to grow. "Maybe this is it, Mason," she said one night, placing my hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby, a grandchild. Maybe this is the one thing that can soften your father's heart. Maybe we can be a family again." I was hesitant. I knew my father. His pride was a fortress, and I wasn't sure anything could breach it. But seeing the hope in her eyes, I couldn't say no. I nodded. "We'll try," I said. "We'll go back. We'll tell them at Christmas." We began to plan our return, armed with the one thing we believed my father deep down could not reject, the news of his first grandchild. On Christmas Eve, a heavy snow began to fall, blanketing the familiar roads back to the Thompson mansion. I held Rebecca's hand as we walked up the stone steps, my heart pounding so hard it felt like a drum against my ribs. Her hand was cold in mine, but she managed a brave smile, her eyes glowing with hope. "It'll be okay, Mason," she whispered. I nodded, though a tidal wave of unease was churning in my stomach. The heavy oak door swung open. The lively chatter from inside instantly fell silent. My father stood at the threshold, his gaze as cold and hard as ice. He looked at us as if we were something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. Behind him, my mother stood, wearing a deep green silk dress, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She forced a strained, terrified smile. Jacob, already seated at the dining table, raised a glass of wine and smirked at me. Only Hazel, standing by the fireplace, showed a flicker of light in her eyes, though she quickly lowered her head, afraid to disrupt the fragile, toxic atmosphere. We stepped inside. The air in the dining room was thick with tension, heavy as a brewing storm. The table was set for a feast, a white silk tablecloth, flickering silver candlesticks, and plates of food my mother had clearly spent all day preparing. But no one was eating. I guided Rebecca to a seat, feeling the weight of my family's stares like daggers in my back. My father sat at the head of the table, his gaunt fingers veined with tension. Jacob was nonchalant, twirling his wine glass. Hazel sat silently, her eyes flickering between me and my father. I took a deep breath, my hand finding Rebecca's under the table. Her skin was warm, but I could feel her pulse racing. "Dad, Mom," I began, my voice trembling slightly before I steadied it. We have good news we wanted to tell you. Rebecca is pregnant." I paused, my heart aching with a desperate, foolish hope. "You're going to be grandparents. The baby will carry the Thompson bloodline." I looked at my father, praying for a spark, a flicker of humanity, any sign of the man who had raised me. He just stared at me. His gaze was like two blades cutting deep into my soul. He leaned forward, his lips pressed into a thin, white line. He spoke slowly, his voice sharp as a shard of glass. "That child," he said, "doesn't deserve to bear the Thompson name." Each word was a physical blow. The air was sucked from the room. "You've already removed yourself from this family, Mason," he continued, his voice heavy with contempt. "Did you truly think I would accept her?" He gestured to Rebecca, who tensed beside me but held her head high, her gaze resolute. "Sir," Rebecca said, her voice calm but trembling, "I don't need your acceptance to love Mason, and I don't need it to love our child." Her words were a small, bright flame in the suffocating cold, but my father only scoffed, that same dry, emotionless sound from his study. Suddenly my mother stood up, her chair scraping violently against the wooden floor. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and her trembling hands covered her mouth as she tried to stifle a sob. "Bernard, enough," she cried, her voice breaking. My father just shook his head, his eyes never leaving me. "Catherine, sit down." She turned and fled, hurrying up the staircase, her figure disappearing into the dark hallway. We all heard the bedroom door slam shut, a sound that echoed her complete and utter helplessness. From the corner of the table, Jacob raised his glass in a mock toast. "Congratulations, big brother," he sneered, his tone flippant. "A new family, how touching." I looked at him, my heart shattering, but I didn't respond. He would never understand. Hazel had her head bowed, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. I could see the pain in her, the empathy, but she too chose silence. She was trapped. I felt the last thread of hope inside me snap. The man I had called father was gone, replaced by this monster of pride. I refused to let him see me break. I stood up, pulling Rebecca gently to her feet. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small, wrapped box we had brought, the Christmas gift. I placed it on the table, right in front of him. "This is a sonogram of your grandchild," I said, my voice dangerously calm, though my whole body was shaking. "The child you will never meet." My father glanced at the box. His eyes flickered for just a second, and then he turned his head away, dismissing it. "Dismissing us." "Let's go, Mason," Rebecca whispered, her voice certain. I nodded. I led her out of that dining room, past the flickering candles that now seemed to mock us. We walked out the front door into the snow, which was falling thicker now, dusting our shoulders like a cold blanket. Behind us, I heard the screech of the iron gate as it closed. It was a sharp, final sound, a verdict. Christmas, a time for family, had become the day I was erased. I held Rebecca's hand, feeling her warmth against the biting wind. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice choked. She shook her head and pulled me into a hug right there in the snow. "You don't need to apologize, Mason. We have each other, and we have our child. That's all I need." I looked at her, her eyes shining in the dark, and I knew she was right. I had lost a family, but I was holding my real family in my arms. We walked away from the Thompson mansion, and I made a vow to myself. I would never let my child feel the pain of a night like this. The days following that Christmas Eve were turbulent. I returned to my job at the small investment firm, trying to force a sense of normalcy, trying to build a future for my new family. But my father, I would soon learn, was not finished with me. Bernard Thompson never let anyone challenge him without paying a price. One morning, about 2 weeks after that night, my boss called me into his office. He was a good man, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mason," he said, shuffling papers on his desk, I'm afraid we have to let you go. We're downsizing." The explanation was vague, unconvincing. "Downsizing?" I pressed. "We just landed the Miller account. We're hiring, not firing." He finally looked up, his eyes full of pity. "Look, son," he muttered, "I can't get into it. My hands are tied, there's pressure from above." My blood ran cold. Pressure from who? He just shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mason, my advice, get out of Savannah, you won't find work here." I stood outside the office, clutching the termination letter, feeling the ground crumble beneath me. I knew with absolute certainty whose hand was at work. My father's influence, his vast financial connections, were like a web across the entire city. When I returned to our apartment, Rebecca was there, her eyes shining with resolve. "We'll be okay, Mason," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You'll find something else." And I did. I found a job at a smaller consulting group. I lasted 3 weeks before I was downsized again. Then I got a job doing bookkeeping for a local wholesaler. That lasted a month. Everywhere I went, the same pattern repeated. A vague excuse, a regretful manager, and me back on the street. It was an investigation in reverse. I wasn't looking for a culprit. I was just following the trail of destruction he left behind. Rebecca, ever resilient, had opened a small tailoring shop in our neighborhood. She was talented, and her business started to pick up. It was the one bright spot, the one thing my father couldn't seem to touch. Until he did. A few weeks later, her shop, which was always full of women chatting and laughing, grew quiet. Customers stopped coming. The women who once greeted her warmly at the market now avoided her gaze, citing vague excuses about being busy. Our savings began to dwindle. The investigation became a daily, desperate question. How are we going to pay rent? How are we going to buy food? The final confirmation came from one of Rebecca's few remaining loyal customers, Mrs. Harris. She pulled Rebecca aside at the market one afternoon, looking around nervously. "Miss Allen," she whispered, "I don't want you to get in trouble, but I think you should know. Some men in suits, they came from Savannah. They've been talking to your landlord, to the other shop owners. They weren't friendly. They said you and your husband were bad for business." Rebecca came home and told me, her voice trembling for the first time. I felt a rage so pure and hot it nearly blinded me. My father wasn't just trying to ruin my life. He was targeting Rebecca. He was trying to starve our unborn child. I couldn't take it anymore. That night I called the mansion. My father picked up. "Mason," he said, his voice as cold and empty as a winter sky. "Are you finally calling to apologize? Are you ready to come home?" "What are you doing?" I yelled, all my composure gone. "Why won't you just leave us alone? You disowned me, you won. What more do you want?" He laughed, that dry, terrible laugh. "You think you can walk away from your responsibilities and live like some? Nobody. I gave you every chance, Mason. I gave you a name, a future, wealth, and you threw it all away. This is the consequence of your choice." "My choice? You're trying to destroy us. Rebecca has done nothing to you. She is the one who poisoned you against your own family. You'll learn, Mason. When you're on the street with nothing, you'll remember. Burr, what I offered you, come back, leave her, and take your rightful place at Thompson and Company, and I'll stop this." "Don't you get it?" I replied, my voice choked with pain and anger. "I will never come back. I found happiness. I found a real family, and you can't take that away from me." "We'll see," he said and hung up. The beeping tone in my ear sounded like a death knell. I looked at Rebecca, at her hands resting on her growing stomach. My father wasn't just influencing people, he was actively hunting us. We weren't safe here. We weren't safe anywhere in Georgia. "He won't stop," I whispered to Rebecca. "I know," she said, her eyes dark. "So we have to go where he can't find us. We have to leave Savannah tonight." Our plan was one of pure survival. We had to disappear. Rebecca's family was from a small, rural town in Alabama, a place so far off the grid that my father's financial influence wouldn't reach. It was our only option. That night we packed. We sold what little furniture we had for cash. I packed a few shirts. Rebecca carefully wrapped some old ceramic bowls and a few family photos. "We're starting over, Mason," she said, her voice soft but certain. "And this time it will be our own life on our own terms." We left in the dead of night, using the last of our money for gas. We drove out of Georgia, leaving my home, my past, and the long shadow of my father behind. The village in Alabama was small, nestled among golden cornfields. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, and simple wooden houses dotted the landscape. To me, it was a foreign planet. No skyscrapers, no boardrooms, no ringing phones, but that very unfamiliarity brought a profound sense of relief. I was no longer the Thompson heir. I was just Mason. Rebecca's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Allen, welcomed us with open arms, their warmth a soothing balm on our raw nerves. They gave us a small, old wooden house on their property. It wasn't much, but it was safe. I had to find work. My financial background was useless here. I got a job as a farmhand at a nearby farm. The work was grueling. I hauled crates of produce and fixed fences under a scorching sun. My hands, once soft from paperwork, grew calloused and raw. Sweat soaked my shirt within minutes. But at the end of the day, I felt an exhaustion that was clean and ease I'd never known. There were no more complex financial reports, no more scrutinizing stares. Every evening, I'd return to our little house, and Rebecca would be there. A simple meal of bean soup and bread on the table. Her laughter filled the small space, and I realized that true happiness wasn't in lavish feasts, but in these quiet moments sitting beside her, my heart full. Rebecca opened a small tailoring shop at the corner of the village market, using an old sewing machine her mother had given her. The work was demanding, but she persevered, and soon her shop became a gathering place for the local women. I felt a surge of pride watching her earn their respect. Spring arrived, and with it, gentle rains and vibrant green fields. One morning, Rebecca went into labor. I drove her to the small county hospital, holding her hand the entire way, my heart pounding with a mix of terror and excitement. When our son's first cry echoed through the room, I knelt by her bed, tears streaming down my face. We named him Luke. He had his mother's dark, curly hair and her bright, sparkling eyes. He was the most precious thing I had ever held. "Thank you," I whispered to Rebecca, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for giving me everything." Luke's birth brought a new, overwhelming joy. Rebecca's family surrounded us, bearing blessings and small, hand-knitted gifts. This, I realized, was the true meaning of family: unconditional love, free of calculations and expectations. But our peace was fragile. We had been there for a year. Luke was just starting to take his first wobbly steps when the shadow found us again. One morning, the farm owner called me over, his face grim. "Mason, I'm sorry," he said, his voice hesitant. I can't keep you on. There are some issues." My stomach dropped. Issues? What issues? He wouldn't look at me. "Some folks from Savannah came by, asking about you. They're investors in the co-op." "I can't risk my farm, son. I'm sorry." My father had found us, even here. A few weeks later, Rebecca's shop started to lose customers. The same pattern, the same whispers. We were trapped. We moved again to an even smaller, more remote town. I found work at an auto repair shop, a low-paying manual job. Rebecca tried to reopen her shop, but the spark in her eyes had dimmed. Worry had etched itself onto her face. One chilly early winter afternoon, there was a knock on the door of our tiny apartment. I tensed, my heart pounding, fearing it was more bad news. Rebecca, playing with Luke on the rugs, looked up, her eyes wide with concern. I opened the door and my world tilted. It was my mother. I said. He stood there, gaunt and frail, clutching an old suitcase, her thin coat trembling in the cold. Her silver hair was messy, but her eyes held a determination I had never seen in my life. "Mason," she said, her voice choked but resolute, "I came to see you." I was stunned, unable to speak. Rebecca stood, holding Luke in her arms, and invited her in. We sat around our small table. My mother spoke, her voice heavy with emotion. She'd overheard my father talking to the private investigator he'd hired. She learned everything: how he'd systematically hunted us, pressured employers, and driven away Rebecca's customers. "I couldn't stand it anymore," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I've spent my whole life in silence, letting your father control everything, but I can't let him destroy your life any longer." She revealed that she had left him, she had left Savannah. And she had brought her a secret, a stash of savings she'd kept hidden from my father for decades, money from her own family that he never knew existed. "I want to use it to help you, Mason," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for not protecting you when you needed me most." Her apology was a key, unlocking years of resentment. I remembered her reading me stories, her voice warm. That voice wasn't gone, it was just buried. I said nothing, I just stood and hugged her. Her frail arms wrapped around me, and in that embrace I felt the love I thought was lost. Rebecca smiled through her own tears. "Stay with us," she said. My mother nodded, a rare, true smile breaking across her face. With my mother's help, our plan finally had a foundation. We used her savings to buy a small piece of land and build a real home. My mother looked after Luke, and to my astonishment, she pulled out a box of paints and old canvases. "I used to paint," she said hesitantly, but as she began to sketch, her hands, though trembling, were sure. Life returned to her. Our life, for the first time, was stable. It was simple, built on hard work and love, far from the shadow of Bernard Thompson. 6 more years passed. Our life in Alabama settled into a rhythm that was peaceful and strong. I'd started my own small financial consulting firm, helping the local farmers and small business owners that my father would have dismissed. Rebecca's tailoring shop was thriving, and Luke, our bright, joyful son, was growing up in a home filled with love, laughter, and my mother's beautiful paintings. The pressure from my father had vanished. My mother's departure, it seemed, had been a blow he never recovered from. I started to believe we had truly escaped. Then one early autumn night the phone rang. It was Hazel. Her voice was trembling, stripped of its usual calm. "Mason," she said, and I could hear her trying not to cry. "Things here, they're falling apart." I sat down, my heart pounding. Hazel explained that since my mother left, our father had grown silent, almost unrecognizable. He locked himself in his study, drinking heavily, and stared out the window for days. Thompson and Company, the empire he'd built with such iron-fisted pride, was crumbling. But the worst part, Hazel said, was Jacob. My father, in his grief and decline, had given Jacob a position of power, and Jacob, with his characteristic recklessness, had used it to embezzle company funds. He'd spent lavishly, and when the scandal broke, the press descended like vultures. Stocks plummeted, partners fled. The Thompson name was mud. "Dad knows everything," Hazel said, her voice breaking. "He knows his pride pushed everyone away and let this happen. He just sits in his study, Mason, staring at the sonogram you left on the table that Christmas. He calls your name in his sleep." The call ended and I sat in the darkness. Rebecca came in and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Hazel?" she asked. I nodded and told her everything. A storm of emotions churned inside me. Anger, pain, and, to my surprise, a flicker of pity. A few days later, the phone rang again. It was Hazel, and she was crying. "Mason, Dad's in the hospital. He had a stroke. He's very weak. He's asking for you. Can you please come back?" I looked at Rebecca, at my mother, at the peaceful life we had built from the ashes of our old one. Rebecca nodded, her eyes full of a strength that had always been my anchor. "You have to go," she said. I drove through the night, the road to Savannah, feeling both familiar and alien. When I arrived at the hospital, dawn was breaking. Hazel met me in the hallway and hugged me tightly. "He's in here." I walked into the room. The man in the bed was not the titan who had haunted my life. He was frail, his hair almost entirely white, his skin thin as paper. He looked small. As I approached, his eyes flickered open and he saw me. His gaze filled with surprise, then a deep, rattling pain and regret. He raised a trembling hand. I pulled a chair to his bedside and took it. His skin was sea. "Old." "Mason," he whispered, his voice weak. "I'm sorry." That one word shattered the last wall of anger inside me. "I was wrong," he continued, tears rolling down his weathered face. "I let pride blind me. I built an empire, but I lost. I lost my family. I lost you." I bowed my head, my own tears falling. All the years of hurt, the pain, the rage, it just washed away. I squeezed his hand. "Focus on getting better, Dad. I'm here." We talked for the first time in our lives, really talked. I told him about Luke, about his laugh, about how he was smart like his grandmother. My father smiled, a weak but genuine smile, his eyes lighting up at the stories of the grandson he had never met. A few days later, I brought Rebecca, Luke, and my mother back to Savannah. We walked into the Thompson mansion. But this time, Rebecca's laughter filled the halls, Luke ran through the corridors, and my mother began hanging her paintings on the walls. The house, once a cold prison, started to feel like a home. I officially took over as CEO of Thompson and Company. The books were a disaster. The employees were terrified, but I wasn't. I had survived my father's wrath and built a life from nothing. This was just business. Jacob appeared one day, haggard and broken. "Big brother," he said, "I have nowhere to go." I looked at him, my heart aching. "You can stay," I said calmly, "but you'll start in the mailroom and you'll earn back every penny you stole, no more mistakes." He looked at me stunned, but he nodded. For the first time, he was ready to work. It took 2 years, but I rebuilt Thompson and Company. I ran it with a new approach, with fairness and integrity, not fear. Our partners returned. Our name was restored, this time as a symbol of resilience. My father's health improved. He began to walk again. I'd find him in the garden, playing with Luke, patiently telling him stories about the ships on the river. He and my mother, they were like two people rediscovering each other after a long winter. One spring morning, my father called me into his study. He stood not in a suit but a simple sweater. "Mason," he said, "I'm retiring. The company is yours to run as you see fit." He hugged me awkwardly but warmly. "I'm proud of you, son." That night, Rebecca told me she was pregnant again. We were having a girl. My father insisted on throwing a grand party. As the music played, he stood, raising a glass. "I spent my life chasing reputation," he said, his voice strong. And I paid a heavy price. I lost years to my own blindness. But my son Mason and his incredible wife Rebecca and my grandson Luke and the new baby on the way, they are the Thompson legacy, not by title but by love. As fireworks burst over Savannah, I stood on the porch, Rebecca leaning against my shoulder. My mother and father stood nearby, hand in hand. Jacob and Hazel were laughing with Luke. My life, once shattered, had been stitched back together with threads of forgiveness and love. I had left the gilded cage, and in doing so I had finally set us all free.